So today we are talking about qualifying potential buyers and sellers. From the Eugene Springfield office, we have Kurt Delahook. He is one of our top producers in our office here. Um, I encourage you to go ahead and read his bio in the email that went out today for this Ignite class. He also has brought a special guest with him. I'll leave it to him to kind of introduce there. But yeah, Kurt, thanks for being here. Go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great, Aaron. Thank you. So excited to connect with everyone here this afternoon. Seems like only a few years ago I was going through this Ignite course myself, and I've certainly benefited from it. So trying to give back a little bit. And I also invited Cody Martin with Secure Choice Lending. He's here today to talk a little bit on the buyer side. The way I have this formatted, I'm using the Ignite curriculum, but I also am bringing in quite a bit of additional, just kind of experiential information that I'll integrate with what we're doing today. The first half, we're going to focus on buyers. So naturally, my mindset was going towards, well, let's get a lender out here. Not just any lender, of course, but Cody Martin with Secure Choice Lending, one of the top lenders in the area, and he's local as well as the Eugene Springfield area. So I just wanted to open things up to him, and then I was going to kind of interview him a little bit, throw a few questions at him, hopefully catch him on his toes a little bit, and then we'll jump more into the curriculum from there. So Cody, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. So my name is Cody Martin, Secure Choice Lending. I have been doing this whole lending thing since 2011. I switched over to mortgage in 2015, 2 days before my youngest daughter was born. So I know the exact date, December 6, 2015, which is nice. But I've closed about 1,000 transactions. I worked at OCCU for about a decade, worked at Summit Funding for about a year, and moved over to Secure Choice Lending because brokers are better. Hey, hey.
And can you touch base? That was one of my questions, actually. Can you touch base on the difference between lenders and mortgage brokers?
Yeah, for sure. The biggest difference right off the top is cost. Like the major difference maker for me in making the change was because I was in a situation time after time where I would be talking to a friend or have a very close handoff, and I just didn't feel comfortable with what I was able to offer them in terms of cost. Like service is great, can take care of them. I know the loan is going to close, but it really hurt me to know that I was charging somebody an extra few $1,000s by them going with me when I could save them money if I were to refer them to one of my broker friends. So luckily, a bunch of us all got together, ran away, started our little Secure Choice Lending branch. It's a nationwide company, but we are the only Oregon branch. But yeah, it's been fantastic so far.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody. So something we're talking about today, of course, is how we're qualifying buyers. So I've heard it from different lenders and different professionals that sometimes real estate agents will overqualify a buyer or perhaps try to act like the lender in some situations. What have you seen from your experience, and what does a good handoff in terms of lead generation and if these agents are prospecting, what does a good handoff look like to you?
Sure. So I'm going to break
Cody,
that to hello.
before you get started, Cody, are we going to get his contact information?
For sure.
Okay,
We'll
will be that in an email or in the chat or somewhere?
I'll put it in the chat, and I'm sure Kurt can follow up and send it out to everybody.
I love that. Thank you.
For sure. So, two-part answer. The first thing is I'm not a real estate agent, so I never give real estate advice to my borrowers. And I hope any real estate agent that I'm working with kind of feels the same exact way when they're looking at lending. It's really difficult to go back on information that has been given. And like the number one thing right now is interest rates because they're a little bit high. We all know that. But the hardest thing to undo is the moment that somebody says the interest rate is this, and then in reality, hey, rates went up that day. It is what it is. You always want to have that conversation be done with the lender because it's not only going to make things easier for you because you don't have to deliver that bad news of, hey, the interest rate's 6.5%. I'm sorry about that. But it also makes sure that they're getting up-to-date, accurate information, and then also being preempted that until they lock in that interest rate, things are going to be fluctuating similar to like how the stock market does. But that is the biggest thing that I personally run into. And it's like, we're all professionals here, and we want to make sure that the answers are coming from whoever is on that specific side to ensure that all that information is going to be accurate for them. And it's also a trust thing too, because I've had situations in the past where it's been hard to have conversations with the borrower because they would ask the question to the real estate agent, and then the real estate agent would ask the question to me. And then you're playing telephone and acting as the third party between everybody. And like, honestly, you want to build that rapport with your lender, with your clients, so that they can all have that communication either in a text thread or just knowing that it's going to be taken care of. The last thing you want to be doing is trying to be jack of all trades, because that's where things get lost in the shuffle. But going back into like good transitions, the number one thing that works incredibly well is setting up a group text. A lot of people are always like, hey, where are we at? Where are they? Have they done the application yet? If you do a group text, it allows you to do two things. One is you're going to do a warm handoff. So you know that everybody has everybody's contact information. You have the opportunity to honor the person that you're giving that referral to. And then it allows them to honor you back by saying, hey, thank you so much. Really enjoying worked with you in the past, yada, yada, and like build you up on the response there, and then can segue into their own individual conversation there. But the reason setting up that group text from the beginning is so important is because it's going to allow you to know where everything is at. You're not going to be stuck wondering or having to go back through notes. You're going to have a fluid wall of text. It's going to tell you exactly where everything is. Because if I learned anything, everybody wants to know where things are, and that's going to make it really simple on you guys.
And thank you, Sarah, for asking questions. I want to make sure this is a really interactive class we're doing today, so make sure to ask tons of questions throughout. I think any good real estate agent should just be peppering Cody, Aaron with questions on a regular basis, whether in this class or outside of this class. So just have a very inquisitive kind of mindset today as we go through this material.
I was
Yes,
actually
Sarah.
going to ask one more thing, or kind of make sure everybody was aware, because when you were talking, Cody, about what the interest rate is, it may be completely different for me than from you too.
Yes.
So we can't know for the person until they go through the process. So
Mhm.
you never want to speculate because you don't know what their credit report is. You don't have all the facts. So
Yes.
yeah, I would
And you
never
never,
make a guess.
exactly. And you never, like, your time is valuable. Everybody's time is valuable. I've seen agents where they have driven somebody around for a week and a half before somebody got pre-qualified. They found the house, they submitted the offer, and push comes to shove, and they did not qualify. There were things that could have been done to get them to qualify within 30 days, but because that person was dragging their feet on not getting qualified, they didn't find out about those things until the very last second. So not only is like the warm handoff important for making sure that things run smoothly, but it's also important in finding things up front that need to be dealt with so that when things do come to that point of making the offer, everybody's ready and you're not in a dead sprint to the finish. I have done far too many pre-approvals day of for the offer, and it's always like, man, we could really make this so much easier and streamline this process if we just make sure that we have these conversations ahead of time. Because it's like, not everybody has their taxes on hand. Sometimes they have to call their CPA, log in a TurboTax, et cetera, et cetera.
That's perfect. And Sarah, just like you were saying with interest rates, something I came across recently was a local lender was advertising a specific rate on their homepage, on their website, and that was a paid for, a paid down rate. So really can seem misleading and certainly confused one of my clients. So always good to be really careful on sharing rates, and like Cody's saying, defer to the lender or the mortgage broker in that situation.
A good
Um,
lender is never going to advertise interest rates, in my opinion, because of how fluid they are. It really is like an attention grabbing kind of thing. And 99% of the time when they actually are asking about the rate, it's going to be different.
Excellent.
So what would be a good, sorry to interrupt, what would be a good script? Like if you're talking to a potential buyer and they're like, hey, what are the interest rates?
Really
how do
easy
you,
segue at that point is interest rates. I know they've been a little bit high lately. Do you have a lender that you're working with? If depending on their answer, so they say, yeah, I've been talking to so-and-so. It's like, okay, have you gotten pre-qualified with that person at this point? Because they're going to be able to tell you where interest rates are. And if you want, I can try to get Cody on the phone right now and see if he can give you a little bit more information. If you want me to give him a call, something like that. Like you
Okay.
really want to spin it back. You don't want to answer because it really like, depending on what loan program they're going through is going to change rates, what their credit is, what their debt to income ratio, all that kind of stuff is going to factor. If they don't want to do anything like that, you can be like, I've heard they're somewhere in like the 6 or 7% range. And that'll give you just like, it kind of ends the conversation about that at that point.
Okay. Helpful. Thank you.
For sure.
And something you can also mention to add to what Cody was saying, Allison, is if you want to provide some sense of hope in this tough market for buyers, is on our end, we can mention something to the extent of, well, we are, depending on the home, we can negotiate some type of seller credit to help towards interest rate buy down, to help with that burden of the interest rate. So it's very situationally dependent. So I don't promise anything, but you can mention that that could be an option depending on the home and
Okay.
on the seller.
Great.
But yeah,
Thank you.
I wouldn't quote exact interest rates when you can help it.
Okay.
I don't
Good to
quote
know.
exact interest rates until we've locked in, just because there's been too many times that there's been a turn. And like if it turns for the better, that is always a great conversation to have. But the moment that things went up an eighth of a percent, you're having that backtrack conversation. You told me this. Why is it now that?
Yeah.
And the market change is not the easiest answer to provide at that point.
No, definitely not. Thank you.
Perfect. And I have about 2 more questions for you, Cody.
Okay.
I'll try and some of them more specific than others, but one of them just from the mortgage broker perspective, what do you most often see in leads that real estate agents provide to you that disqualifies them?
Two-way tie. Number one is student loan payments, and then like so much student loan debt is out there, and not everybody is aware that there's income-driven repayment plans that can be done, and that can change everything. Because like a lot of the time people are like, well, I don't have to start paying on my student loans right now. What's the big deal? So there are some loan types, they're going to hit them with 0.5% or 1% of that balance. And depending on how much student loan debt they have, that could easily disqualify them from being able to qualify for the time being. And then it's like, okay, let's get you applying for the income-driven repayment plan. But as we all know, with federal government applications, sometimes they take a little bit of time. So you're waiting a couple of months at that point. The other item is going to be negative items on their credit report that they were not aware of. I will actually give you all if you plug it into your Google machine, the CFPB submit a complaint. That is the easiest way to help somebody fix their credit. And I have had friends do this. I have had clients do this. But in the situation, if there's something on your credit report that is negative, you go there, you submit a complaint through the CFPB, and sometimes, but not every time, that gets flat out deleted from your credit report because it puts it on the creditor to prove that you owe that debt. And as it would turn out, when things go to collections, even if you did owe that debt, there's not always the best paper trail. And if they can't prove that you owe that debt is then erased. I've seen it happen for medical. I've seen it happen for repos on cars, all kinds of things. It was literally the last piece of the puzzle for a friend of mine getting into a home. She had an old furniture credit card from her and her ex-husband, submitted the complaint. She was able to buy a house in about 7 or 8 months rather than 3 or 4 years. It's great.
Fantastic. And the last thing I wanted to touch on while you're here, Cody, I appreciate all the input and insight. And we want to make sure to get your contact info in the comments before you depart. But in terms of the lender and real estate agent relationship with working together on a lead. So of course, as we all know, buyers don't all purchase a home within the first week of contacting them. But how have you seen kind of that relationship help with moving clients forward in the process? How can that be complementary?
The best thing about it is that you have built-in marketing for you. Because the moment that you refer somebody to somebody, like if Kurt sends me a referral, I'm not going to drop the ball. I am now a reflection on Kurt at that point. So it becomes my job to start following up with that client the same way that Kurt would. So I am doing light touches with that client, even if it's something where, hey, we're in credit repair and we're looking at 3 to 6 months before any of that starts taking shape. I'm still going to be checking in with them to make sure that things are going well. They don't have any questions. And like, I feel like a lot of people in our industries think that they're bothering people, and it's really not that, in my opinion. I have done follow-up texts to a client for 6 months with no response from them, and then randomly out of the blue, they said, hey, I want to make an offer on this house. Everybody has their lives, everybody has their schedules, but staying in front of people is super important, and having that referral partner that you are now paired with has given you an extra light touch to be able to stay in front of that client as well. Because it's going to be every time I'm checking in, it's like, hey, when's the last time you talked with Kurt? Is he up to date? Want me to give him a call? Something like that.
Perfect, perfect. And yeah, it's just kind of a little bit of a back and forth with the lender. And I like to try and check in with the lender sometimes before I reach back out to the client to make sure we're not both contacting them on the same day with, hey, where are you at in the process? Or what can I do for you? And you know, but just to complement each other and move those clients forward together. Yes, is it Isha?
Yeah, so I started my real estate career around 3 months back, and I had a situation where I introduced one of my clients to the lender, my lender partner, and then what happened? He refused me to work with, and but he was still with the lender partner. So that was a very, sometimes a very embarrassing situation for a realtor, that client got a new realtor, but he still wants to be with my lender partner. How should we react in that situation? It really touched my heart, and I felt it bad about it. But what should be done?
So I actually just had this happen. I was referred a client by a real estate agent here in Oregon, and then that client shifted entirely and started looking for homes in very southern Washington. So it was an easier handoff in that situation, but at the same time, this agent had been working with this person on and off for about 2 years. And it came completely out of the blue. And even now, with this client, I'm still following up with them, asking about my realtor partner and making sure that they're still front of mind so that if they do adjust back to Oregon, that they still have this person top of mind at that point. In my opinion, in your situation, the first thing I would be doing would be asking to meet with that lender and finding out why. Because there's nothing wrong with having that conversation and getting more information for what was the hangup? Is it something that I could have done? Was there anything that they said to you? Like, what could I have done better to capture that client for myself? How could I have done that? Because I feel like it kind of came out of the blue, because it also gives you the opportunity to talk to that lender, because in my opinion, that lender's job is to make sure you get paid. Their job is to make sure that that client stays with you and in every way possible. I think if it was me personally, I would be asking to follow up and asking the hard questions. Don't be afraid to get uncomfortable, because that's okay. And you should have the closure for why. And like, if it was something where, like, not saying this is the case, but if it was something where they like didn't like how you presented something, or they met with somebody who presented something better, that's an opportunity for you to build your business better for the next one. Because I remember my manager, the first time that I made a mistake back in 2015, 2016, it cost the place that I was working at like $600. And I felt awful about it. And he was like, I just paid $600 to get you trained on this, never make that mistake again. And I didn't. And it's like, every mistake that we make in these, we have to think about them as a training, learning opportunity for us to not make it again. And asking that lender, figuring out what that was, could potentially prevent that from happening if there was something that did happen.
Okay.
Excellent. And Isha, I was going to add to that as well. That to some extent can be the nature of the business. I think things will get better as we're required to use the buyer broker agreements that are going to affect August 17th. So that should help with those relationships. But I can say as well, Isha, I've lost many a buyer, and it's a bit uncertain or unclear why they stopped communicating or what direction they chose to go. And you know, sometimes, for instance, a buyer without buyer broker agreements in place might just choose to work directly with the listing agent, and then that listing agent can do the dual representation. Not ideal, of course, for us as buyer agents, but there's so many variables that can come into play. And then another situation that can often occur is where in this situation it seems like the lender got the better deal. There will be some situations as well where the lender might be replaced by the buyer for a whole variety or host of reasons, and the lender might be on the other side frustrated. But what I've found is oftentimes when you find a lender you like to work with, the more you put their interests, maybe not before, but in parallel with your own, the more you're building business together and the more you're growing together. And I think oftentimes, you know, I wouldn't do anything personally to damage the relationship of your past client and the lender, because that lender may come back to you in the future and say, hey, you know, here's enough, you know, of course, brokers are getting quite a bit more business than lenders in terms of lead generation, but they may down the road, say 6 months, a year down the road, provide you with an opportunity where you want to maintain that relationship and not try and burn any bridges. So hopefully that answers your question, Isha.
Yes, thank you so much for the inputs. It's really good to know about this. Yeah.
I will double up on what Kurt said. Like this real estate agent who lost that one, it became my goal to get them a referral at that point, and I did return them a referral of potential buyer for them because I felt bad and I wanted to make sure that they could then still find something with that and replace that one, for lack of a better word.
I feel better now. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you, Cody. I really appreciate it. Would you mind putting your contact info down there in the comments? I think you have access to be able to post in the comment section. And whenever you guys have questions, if you don't have a go-to lender or a lender you can bounce questions off of, definitely lean into Cody. He's got years and years of experience, and he's here to help. Okay, so let's go ahead and transition. Thank you, Cody, for posting that.
Have a good one, guys. Take care.
Thank you so much, Cody.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump into more of the meat and potatoes of the discussion today. I remember being in the classes and not enjoying necessarily going page by page in the workbook, but hopefully you have the workbook in front of you just for reference. But we're going to kind of deep dive into just a lot of things I've experienced. And most of this just over the previous few days, I've typed up and created on my own. And I think you should get at least like 3 to 5 really good takeaways. So I tried to pack this full of good content. So let's jump in. Interrupt me at any point if you have questions. And this is also going to be a very interactive class. So I'm going to have quite a few questions for you and check-ins as well, just based off of what you're experiencing. So a few things to start with. In the Ignite workbook, there's a quote that is important. I'm just going to flip to it. So the quote from Gary Keller in the book Shift says your #1 job as a real estate agent is to find ways to get in the path of motivated buyers and sellers. So, of course, this class is relevant. You can't build business if you don't have leads, if you don't have opportunities. So let's talk about qualifying them and what that's going to look like. I'm glad we had Cody as well to bounce a few ideas past. Okay, so I have a handful of questions just as primers, we'll call them icebreakers, to jump into the qualifying of buyers. So the first question for the group, feel free to jump in at any point, is what does a perfect buyer look like to you? What does a perfect buyer look like?
I guess somebody who's pre-qualified and ready to go, ready to buy.
Okay, and what would their criteria look like?
I don't know, maybe like a conventional loan, a cash buyer, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's great. And the Ignite book talks a lot about ready, willing, and able. So you touched on that, Allison, but these buyers need to be ready, willing, and able. And if they're missing a component there, there's going to be challenges. Sarah, did you have something to add?
I was just gonna say, understanding their debt to ratio so that we can understand a mortgage to ratio option. I mean, a lot of that comes with the conversation with the lender, but I mean, really understanding, because I mean, I'm talking to someone now and they've never bought a home. Yeah, we're ready. We've been renting. We want to go buy a house. And I said, have you talked to a lender? I mean, they have no idea. They're both teachers. And I'm like, how much do you really make? How are you going to make this happen? So yeah, having a realistic expectation, I think, is important with everything else instead, of course.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Perfect. And then also, this one's going to take a little more. We'll kind of get into a little bit better content, deeper content, but does your lead source matter in terms of how you qualify a buyer? And I'll rephrase that. So if your buyer, say is potentially coming from a sphere of influence, versus a buyer that's an internet lead, does your approach change in terms of how you qualify them and how you follow up with them?
I would say no.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, anybody else want to jump in?
And the
Okay.
only reason why I say that is because I would want to treat, my friends and people the same way that I'm treating somebody that I don't know
Sure,
on a
absolutely.
professional.
Absolutely. What I would add to that, so I totally agree with we want to treat everyone equally and professionally at all times. Um, what I my approach or my thought process on this is I will say an internet lead, as you know, is going to be much, much more challenging to work with and to move through the entire process from beginning to end to close than necessarily your sphere type buyer would be. Just because there's so much trust and there is that pre-relationship already built and established that you have with your sphere, which you wouldn't have with that internet lead. So what I could say, just in terms of qualifying them and moving them forward in the process, it's going to take quite a few more touch points early on with that internet lead than with someone that you might know a little bit better. So just things to think about as you're working through leads. And then also a question for everyone, and I'd encourage everyone. It's okay if your camera's not on, but I'd encourage everyone else just to jump in here as much as possible. A large part of our jobs as agents is to be having conversations, and it's also good to brainstorm and plan here together on how to move leads forward. But another question for the group, and then I'll jump into more of my content, and I'll kind of go on a monologue for a little bit. But last question here. So if you engage with a buyer on an initial phone call, talking about criteria, needs, financing, etc., does that mean they're committed to working together with you? Why or why not? So you have a great phone call, say it's a 10-minute phone call. They're really open about their needs, wants, things like that. They're engaged. Are they your lead and your buyer? Yes or no, and why or why not?
I'd say no until you get a buyer rep agreement signed.
Yeah, excellent answer. Anyone else? Yeah, and to add to what Carrie said, thank you, Carrie. If they're not willing to physically meet with you in person, I would say that lead isn't as strong as you think they are. And then also, Carrie, like you said, if they're not willing to sign a buyer broker agreement, there clearly are concerns and issues and things. And of course, that's going to be required come August. So early on, when I was starting out, I wrote this question specifically thinking about my early days. You'd have many great phone calls, say internet leads, and you'd feel like they're on board and you set up a search criteria for them and you're following up and you're checking in. But by no means, if you haven't at least been in person, shook their hand, showed them a few homes, they haven't reached out to you with specific questions about homes, they're probably not your exclusive buyer in that situation. And they may have, for all we know, they may have a cousin that's an agent, or they may have a best friend from high school that they've known for 20 years that they plan to use, but they're just reaching out to you for some info. And so they don't have to bother their friend that they know that they plan to work with. So there are situations where they might be using you. So it's important to try and identify that early on and really see what their motivation is and what their loyalty is as well. So there's questions you can ask in terms of screening them and trying to identify those things early on. And honestly, if you're having a great first or second phone call with a lead, there's no reason you shouldn't throw something in there to the extent of, I look forward to serving you together. Is it fair to assume that I'll be your go-to realtor from here on out? Something like that. And at least put them on the spot, because you don't want to waste hours and hours of your time if that person's not going to deliver on their end and they're taking advantage of you. So any questions on that? Okay. So let me move forward. I have quite a few different things to note. Just wanted to throw some questions in there as an icebreaker. But when it comes to buyers, I have a lot of thoughts. So cut me off at any point if you want to break things down in more detail. So a few things to consider. When it comes to your buyers, if they're in-state versus out-of-state, that's my first consideration to think about. So out-of-state buyers can be quite a bit more difficult to work with, especially because you've never met them in person. Maybe you'll meet them on Zoom, and their criteria and their desire to move to Oregon can certainly change, and their priorities, family-wise, jobs, all sorts of priorities can shift. So it's important to keep that in mind. Not every out-of-state buyer that contacts you that seems like they're going to move here is going to be your go-to, close deal. And just for everyone, as you're doing your first couple of transactions, is it possible for a buyer to be out of state for the entire transaction to purchase the home? Or do they need to be in state at some point during the process?
Do they need to be in state for escrow, like the closing?
That's an excellent question. Sarah's correct. They do not.
Okay, yeah.
And so anyone else want to chime in? Do they need to be in state at any point for the purchase of the property?
I don't think so.
No.
Correct. Thank you, Haley. They can do the entire transaction remotely, including escrow. You just want to make sure that you're coordinating with your escrow office early on to make sure they know that they need to set up a notary at closing for that client. So perfect. Thank you, Haley. But yes, everything can be done remotely. It will probably be a bit more challenging to get your offer accepted if your client has never seen the property in person. Some listing agents will screen for that, but it's something to keep in mind. They can close remotely. I will say it's, yes, please go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say, I've done it 3 times
You've
where
done it
I've
3
just
times.
called my guy and said, hey, go look at this. And he does a video walkthrough and he does the inspection for me. And then everything is done over DocuSign. And then they send the title company will send you the name of the guy who'll bring the papers to you. Mind blanking. But yeah, it can
Notary.
be the public notary will come to your house and do it all. So yeah, it's all just making sure that you have somebody you trust, right? To put all the ducks in a row.
Excellent. Exactly. So yes, it can be done remotely. And then jumping into key features that we're looking for in a buyer. So what are we looking for? We're talking about perfect buyers. What does that look like? So the first one is timing, right? And that ties in with motivation. Do they need to move, or is it a preferential move? That's a big one, right? Are they really happy where they're at? Are they in a rental and maybe they're paying $1,400 a month? And if they purchase and have a mortgage, they're going to be paying $2,900 a month. So, they might not be super excited or motivated. That's really key. What does their timing look like? What does their motivation look like? So get a feel for that early on as you're talking through things. And that should naturally come out in conversation with the buyer as you're doing an initial call. And you can just ask casually things about, to meet your needs, what timing You know, how can I best support your timing as a buyer to purchase the home? You know, things like that, where you're coming at it from a supportive standpoint. You don't want to feel like you're grilling or interviewing that lead, but you just want to see how you can support them. And then also what their reason for moving is. Why in the world are they moving, right? They should at least be sharing some general details. They don't have to tell you the whole life story, but you need an idea of why they're moving so that you can best, and that's going to tie in with their criteria and their needs as well. Loyalty is a big one when it comes to your buyer. I recently had a buyer who I've invested a substantial amount of time into this past fall and through the winter. And they recently reached out and said, we put an offer in on a different property in the Elkton area, and fortunately it fell through, but I wasn't their agent when they put that offer in. I probably put, you know, 20 plus hours of work into them and showed them between 12 and 15 properties virtually and in person, you know, and they're out of state buyers, so they're not always in town. But, you know, not every buyer's loyal, and a lot of buyers might just see you in a transactional manner. So making sure you establish that relationship is really important, that you are their go-to and that everything runs through you as their buyer's agent. Responsiveness is another big key determinant and factor in terms of the strength of that buyer. So if you're reaching out to that buyer with a key question or a key check-in or seeing what you can do for them, whatever that looks like for lead follow-up, and they're taking 3 or 4 days to get back to you, or they're really just unresponsive, of course, that's a poor sign, that maybe they're slowing down in the purchasing process, they're pumping brakes, or maybe they're talking with another agent. You never know. But they should be relatively responsive from what I've found, if they're a buyer that's going to move forward with you in the process. They should, you know, depending on their preferred mode of communication, they should be picking up the phone to chat. They should be responding to text messages, things like that. And then the last point in this category, so there needs to be a general desire to coordinate and listen to your feedback and expertise. If you're working with a buyer and they kind of blow you off, don't take any suggestions or recommendations, they're talking over you a lot, things like that, certainly another sign, indication that they're not valuing you and your expertise, and they may not be valuing you in terms of your time and the fact that you're treating this as a job and you need to make a paycheck. So just things to watch out for and be mindful of. And the type of buyers that we want to avoid. And just real quick as a check-in, have you guys covered content like this specific, or has it been more broad on this topic in the past? In between. Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. So moving forward, so buyers you want to avoid, and I'm just bringing this in from experience. You really want to avoid buyers that are paranoid, highly emotional, irrational, and I'll break these down. Quick to place blame. So if you feel like you're getting blamed for something that's completely out of your control, you want to be careful with those clients. So quick to place blame, stories about disaster. They start sharing stories with you about disastrous previous real estate transactions that they've had. Things like that. You know, the red flag or like the alarm bell in the back of your head should be like going off in terms of just being careful with how you approach some of these clients. I know early on, as we're screening leads and we're trying to find more opportunities and buyers, especially in this challenging market, we want to work with anyone and everyone, and I totally get that. But we also want to protect you moving forward, where you're not going to have, you know, weeks and weeks of headaches moving forward, and then you only end up serving one client instead of multiple clients because that one client is pulling so much of your time and attention. And then when I talk about just irrational, I'm referring to, you know, that kind of ties in with quick to place blame, but perhaps they lost out on a property. And, you know, this is just a hypothetical. So perhaps they lost out on a property that you showed them, that you told them that there was a competing offer on, and they decided not to pursue it and you lost, or you put an offer and they didn't take your recommendations and you lost out on the price point. And they're continually coming back to that property in future showings, blaming you for losing that property when you know you did everything in your control to be able to help them purchase, you know, that property they wanted. So things like that, where they're just being irrational, it's truly a sign of, you know, it can be a sign of not a great buyer. Another thing that depending on the buyer type that you're pursuing. Another thing that's worth considering is I heard a very seasoned agent tell me something along these lines last year because I was working with a client that was in the $1.1 million range. It sounds great, but his response, and he's been doing this for 20 plus years, and he's one of the top agents in Lane County, but he said, I would rather work for two buyers that are $400,000, $500,000 price range buyers than one that's in the $1.1 to $1.2 million category. And why would he say that?
I'll take a guess. Basically, when you're at the lower levels, you kind of know your expectation. You know what you're looking for. I think they're going to be more realistic. They're probably closer to first time or second time buyers, so they're going to be excited for whatever they get into. Those at the higher range have more expectations. Generally, don't want to do as many repairs. Won't want to deal with any what ifs that happen. They're seeing, I'm $1 million buyer. This is what I want. And with prices the way they are now, $1 million doesn't buy what it used to. So I don't think expectations always reach.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. Anyone else want to add on that? Okay.
Sure.
I would also,
sorry. Go ahead. Okay, sorry. So what I found, at least this is hypothetical, I do believe that clients that are in the higher end typically have a lot more number crunching orientation. Like they're a lot more about getting to the last dollar. And so you often find yourself getting a lot more squeezed as a realtor at the higher end. And that's from what I've heard from other higher end realtors, but I'm not sure if that's the commonplace practice.
Yeah, that can be. Yeah. And Georgia, anything to add?
Oh, I was just gonna say that depending on your area, there's a lot more options in like the lower price range than the 1.1 million. So you have a lot more to like pick from or show your client versus with the higher spenders.
Yeah, those are all excellent points, Georgia, Santosh. Thank you. So continuing exactly along those lines, imagine, for example, you have a client moving from the south where property values are maybe half or 3/4 of what, equivalent square footage would buy you in Eugene. They move out here and they're looking for a $1.2, $1.3 million home. They're going to have a highly selective criteria, and oftentimes they're just going to be a little bit more hopes and dreams and expectations are just going to not always match what they've been used to, potentially in different states at different values. So yes, and they can just be quite a bit more selective, and there can be different challenges. These are generalizations, of course. And then the other thing too is, if you have two really strong $400,000 buyers, they'll probably move forward in the process just a bit more quickly because their expectations aren't quite as high. So those upper price range buyers, oftentimes their timelines are just stretched a little bit from what I've seen and found. So perfect. Let's continue on, unless there's any questions about that. So additional notes about buyers, not to be discouraging, but just to be realistic as you continue forward in your business. So buyers, their priorities might shift, like we talked about. Their timelines oftentimes shift, and their desire to buy might disappear. So there's challenges across the board. Conditions have to be just right. We were talking about ready, willing, and able. And it'll typically take more leads than you expect to close a single deal. I imagine, I don't know by head nods, but if that's kind of what you're experiencing, it's not always that first kind of sniper shot type client that you're moving forward and closing on. You might need 4, 5, 6 of those clients, depending on timelines and needs, to get that first deal done. So always trying to be, lead generation, prospecting, screening prospective buyers. It's always just a key part of what you're doing. And you always want to keep your pipeline robust and full, not just focused on that one buyer and who's hopefully going to buy. You want to have options. You want to have things change, things shift. You need to be diversified in terms of your buyer pool. And the other thing too, as you move forward, you might have some buyers that pump the brakes, or disappear, say for 6 months. Sometimes those buyers do come back around 12 months later. So keep in touch, whether it's a newsletter or even a phone call, every 3 to 6 months. Make sure you're still following up and checking in with those people. Because the longer you're in the business, it just creates that momentum, and then you have those past leads still that you can lean on, and that eventually will convert. So even if they do, even if it is frustrating and you feel like they're wasting your time by not purchasing at the moment, just make sure to maintain that relationship and keep it in good standing. You don't want to burn that bridge, or they might refer you with a friend or relative to provide you with an opportunity. So just always focus on giving top-notch service. So something I wrote along those lines: try to avoid putting all of your eggs in one basket and banking that a buyer will 100% close. Until they've closed, you just never know. There's always variables that come up. Okay, and then I also wrote down the more connections and contacts you have with a buyer, the better. If they're continuing to engage with you on a regular basis and ask you specific real estate questions, you're exactly where you want to be. So they need to be engaged. They need to be a part of the process. You shouldn't feel like they're blowing you off, like you're their go-to agent, you're the expert. They need to be leaning on you throughout the process. Okay, so now I have a handful of scenarios to run past you. And a lot of these are different things that I've had to deal with in the past, but we're going to talk about certain leads, and you're going to tell me if so the question is if they're a good lead opportunity, and tell me yes, no, or maybe, and then just give me a brief sentence or two rationale, if it's a no or a maybe, on why you don't want to work with them. Of course, we want to treat everyone fairly and equally, but we also need to protect your business. And sometimes buyers are going to take advantage of you. So the sooner you can screen for that and recognize that, the better. So I have some scenarios. They're more on the specific side, and I think they'll be helpful just because at some point you will encounter these type of people. So participation is encouraged. The first one, and these are all buyers to start, we'll shift to the seller side here in about 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so the first scenario, you have a buyer who's looking to buy soon. They have to sell their home in Central Oregon first and find a realtor to help them sell before they can purchase. Are they a good lead? Is it would you work with them? Yes, no, or maybe? They're looking to buy soon. Yes, Allison?
Maybe, because it's a contingency.
Mm-hmm.
So
in Georgia? Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was gonna say yes, because then you can get a referral for you can help them find the agent in Central Oregon, and then get a referral once they sell, and then they could come to you once they buy.
Excellent. And what questions might anyone here in the room, what questions might you ask this buyer to help qualify them?
I would understand their urgency and motivation to move.
Excellent. Anything else?
Have they talked to a lender? Do they know what their rates are?
Excellent. Yeah, Isha, thank you in the comments, and Sarah, excellent. I have this on the seller side as well, but be very careful when you start moving forward with someone and selling their home if they're not able to qualify for a home. There's a whole variety of, if they're not able to qualify for their next purchase, there's a whole variety of reasons and factors that could come into play. But just like Sarah's saying, you want to make sure that they're pre-approved, they're pre-qualified for that next purchase. You can end up in all sorts of, I guess, hot water, and people are going to look at you, even though it might not be your fault specifically, if you sell someone's home and they can't purchase something else, right? You just turn them into a renter and into a client that would probably never work with you again. So just something to keep in mind. One other quick thing, I was going to ask it to Cody Martin, but I didn't want that to run too long. One thing that doesn't always show up from experience when clients are getting pre-approved is back taxes. So sometimes there will be back taxes that don't show up on a credit check. And that's just something to keep in mind, kind of a little like gold nugget. If you haven't heard that before, does not always show up on a credit report. But that can definitely weigh heavily on their ability to purchase. Okay. Let's move on to the second scenario. So this buyer wants to buy in 3 to 4 months, and their cousin lives locally and is currently getting their real estate license. Would you work with this buyer? Sarah, you would? So they want to buy in 3 to 4 months, and their cousin lives locally and is currently getting their real estate license. So what questions might you ask in this situation?
How far
They're
away they
planning-
are from getting, oh, sorry.
Okay. If they're planning to use their cousin, I mean,
Yeah, Georgia and Carrie, both excellent excellent points. Are they planning to work with them? Are they going to sign a buyer broker agreement with you? You know, initially you might think red flag, they have a cousin who's going to become an agent. I'm never going to get their business. Maybe they'll sign a buyer broker agreement with you. Maybe they don't like their cousin all that much. Maybe they don't trust their cousin. You know, they might lean towards you and your expertise. So I would say a maybe in this situation, just make sure you're asking qualifying questions so that you're not investing tens of hours, 10, 15, 20 hours into them. And then, you've shown them 20 homes. And then as soon as their relative gets licensed, they just leave you in the dust. So protect yourself. Next question. This buyer's been talking with another realtor and can't decide who to go with. Can you show them a few homes this Saturday? And of course, the buyer broker requirement hasn't gone into effect. Let me backtrack real quick. Has Aaron West put a requirement for you to, no matter what, have a buyer broker agreement moving forward? Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Okay, so this still applies for the next few months. Things are going to shift a little bit, but it's really good to be thinking. So you have a buyer that reaches out, and they've been and in conversation it comes up that they have been talking with another real estate agent. They can't decide who to work with at this point. Are you okay, Isha, with showing the 3 homes on Saturday? Yes, no, or maybe, and what qualifying questions would you ask? Okay, and I can jump in here. First question in this situation should be, have you signed anything in writing or committed to that other agent in any aspect or form, right? We don't want to basically be forcing that buyer to break their contract with another real estate agent, right? Just like we expect reciprocity, we expect the same thing in professionalism from other agents. Initially, I would say this kind of sounds like a waste of time. In terms of protecting your Saturday, it seems like that their go-to real estate agent might just be out of town. Unless they have a specific reason for not working with that other real estate agent, maybe they had a bad experience or they feel like they're not getting good service, chances are they're probably just taking advantage of you. So feel free to, basically tell them, unless we have a buyer broker agreement in place, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, this next buyer, they said they've been looking for a home for 4 years. They might use a real estate agent, but they might also just go get their own real estate license to avoid transactional fees. Would you work with this buyer? Nope. Yeah, absolutely. So a couple comments and head shakes. So no, probably not, right? They're just going to waste your time. I would not waste too much sleep pursuing this specific person. Okay, the next one. The buyer lead says, I'll contact you when I'm ready. How do you follow up and what does your next step look like?
I would just add them in my database and keep sending them every month how my command is helping me to get in touch with the other clients. And maybe in a 15 days or a month, I can check that if their requirement is still the same or they're looking for something else.
Excellent. Anyone else? Okay. Along the same lines, this buyer says, yes, I want to buy, but you can call me tonight after work. Should you immediately assume that that's your lead and that's your buyer? There's opportunity there, but oftentimes if they're kind of hanging up quickly and pushing you back in terms of call me later, it may or may not materialize into, an ideal buyer. But follow up, like Isha's saying, follow up is key. Okay, next scenario. Your best friend is planning to buy and says they wouldn't work with anyone else but you. So this is a pretty strong buyer, of course, right? This is a situation too where you really want to make sure to shine. This person's probably in your immediate friend group and knows most people around you and in your sphere. So you want to take, you take great care of all clients, but you want to make sure that you're really shining in this situation and you're not dropping the ball when you're servicing this best friend. So next one, these buyers, you connect with buyers who aren't sure exactly where in Oregon they want to move to. They're considering Eugene, Lebanon, Albany, Crestwell, Springfield, etc. They need to sell a warehouse in California before they can purchase this home here in Oregon. And they're looking for multi-generational living for under 1.2 million. Would you work for this buyer? Yes, no, or maybe? And I can read that again if you need.
Please read it again.
Yeah, so these buyers are looking all over this region, all over the Willamette Valley, and they need to sell a warehouse in California before they can purchase the home. And they're looking for multi-generational living for under 1.2 million. So would you work with this buyer? Isha says yes. Okay, great. Anyone else?
This
Yeah.
could be a referral opportunity, couldn't it be?
It could, depending on where they end up deciding to go. Any other qualifying questions or things you might want to know about this client?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is I would want to
Mhm.
ask clarifying questions, find out if I can add them maybe to just give them one, here's what I can find in the area, informational kind of event, and keep my information coming to them without a lot of in-depth participation until they've narrowed it down. But giving them general information to the area, what options are available and what areas might be someplace to look, I wouldn't have a problem doing that.
Okay, excellent.
Is the
Yeah.
warehouse pending?
Oh, yes, Isha?
I would like to break this requirement into some pieces, like once the selling part is done, and if I can provide a referral for the selling part if I'm not in the town. Then once it is done, I'll follow up once the sale is done, then what is his requirement, and checking the referral options for a lot of cities, what he's talking about, and like breaking the requirements into pieces first.
Good. Yeah, excellent. And the answer to Carrie's question in the comments, yes, this warehouse is currently pending. So, and then kind of another thing to break down in this is, what does multi-generational living look like? I had a couple buyers in this scenario last year. So what does multi-generational living look like, for you as the buyer? Oftentimes it means more than one home on a property or on two pieces of property that are touching each other. So they want to be able to build and expand oftentimes. Now, what are the challenges with building and expanding on the land? There should be like 10 things, 5 to 10 things that immediately you're like, come to mind. Yes, Sarah? Excellent. Carrie said zoning. Allison?
Yeah, permitting, zoning.
Exactly. Zoning, permitting, what their budget is to be able to add to the land. Yeah, all sorts of things, what county they're going to be in and how strict that county is when it comes to it. Excellent. Georgia, utilities. Are there the utilities that they want accessible? And are they even aware of what pricing can cost for utilities to run them, you know, X distance. So all sorts of things where we don't want to scare buyers when we're qualifying them, right? We want to keep that relationship and maintain and build that relationship and just give them a realistic perspective without like scaring them too much, if that makes sense. But just make sure that you're not over promising and under delivering, because that's always a challenge, right? Because people are going to shoot for the moon. If they're moving from the state that's far less expensive for housing, they just might have unrealistic expectations. So you can kind of professionally, kindly kind of redirect them. And maybe they just, you know, adjust their criteria a little bit and become an amazing buyer. So I wouldn't, you know, I'd at least give these buyers a shot. I would just protect your time unless they are really specific and they have a very realistic criteria. I can say from experience, $1.2 million for multi-generational living in the Eugene Springfield area is a significant challenge. And yes, a significant challenge. And a few of you mentioned zoning, which is excellent. You need to be thinking along those lines. When you see exclusive farm use or farm forest, there are significant challenges with ever being able to divide that to be able to have a separate parcel to build upon, right? So just things to think about. The county has all sorts of rules. Lane County is typically more strict than Lynn County. But you want to make sure that you're familiar with that for your clients and at least shoot the planning department a call or walk in and just say, is this feasible? What should I be thinking about? So, and we never want to overpromise, like I was talking about, for your buyers. The other thing too is making sure you're doing due diligence with your buyers. You want to be careful that something I try and be really careful with is when I relay information, let me make sure, okay. When I relay information on behalf of, say, the planning department or something like that from the county, I really want to make sure that's in writing and that I'm not just verbally expressing, let's say a brand new planner told me regarding a specific tax law. Because of course you don't want that to come back to you in the future, and you don't want Tammy Sue to be reaching out and saying, why did you promise this to a buyer? You know, and then you're leaning back on just a verbal promise from a planner. You want something in writing, right? Especially if it's a large transaction. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so the next scenario, we'll move on. This buyer wants you to help them find land to repurpose for a nonprofit dog and cat sanctuary, but they haven't raised the necessary funds yet. Would you work with this buyer? No. Okay, yeah, no is probably the right answer here. Excellent. I see some people shaking heads. Okay. This is an all-cash buyer looking for a 3-bed, 2-bath in Springfield on its own land for $230,000. Would you work with this buyer? Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
I was just thinking, I don't know the average home. I would expect that to be very low. So I would do a quick search of what, if anything, is available in that price range, and then have a conversation with them about realism and expectation. And then from that conversation, decide one way or the other.
Excellent. Yes, excellent. So yes, be very careful in protecting your time. Sarah, you hit the nail on the head. This criteria probably is not realistic, even though they're a cash buyer. Unless it's a true fixer type property and the home's falling over, chances are your $230,000 won't get the job done. Okay, next buyer is looking for a cash deal, but doesn't want to provide proof of funds when submitting an offer. Would you A, work with this buyer, and B, would you write an offer on this buyer's behalf? Yeah, probably not. There's got to be a really good reason for why you're submitting this offer with no proof of funds. Excellent. Thank you, everyone in the chat. We're almost done with the buyer section. Okay, okay. I ran across this situation early on, and it really frustrated the heck out of me. A buyer has $300,000 in cash in the bank, has no employment or income, and wants to purchase a home for $375,000. How can they purchase this home? I mean, they have so much money. Certainly a lender would use the $300,000 as collateral, right? How do you approach it? I see someone shaking their head. Is this a good buyer?
Well, I do know that there are ways to get around the whole credit score requirement, but I don't remember the specifics regarding that.
Mhm. So, okay, so nothing that I'm familiar with, Santosh, thank you for the input and feedback. There's not an approach that I'm familiar with, but I can say that in this situation, talking with different lenders, there was no one who was willing or able to provide a loan in this situation. The other big thing to think about is if it was an investment property, there might be some options there, but when it's your primary residence, there are, from a lending perspective, from the many lenders I've talked to, there's quite a few more rules and regulations in place when it's your primary residence and not an investment property. So just things to keep in mind. On paper, I thought that was an excellent buyer. And then the more digging I did early on when I was an agent, it just frustrated, it frustrated me to no end. So this next buyer is a veteran moving to Oregon who wants to use the VA loan. He has disability income, military retirement income, and is taking a job in food sales at the University of Oregon. He wants to find a job for under $500,000 in Eugene. Would you work with this buyer? Yep, it's an excellent buyer. Dun, dun, dun. And one just kind of pro tip, I don't know if you guys have heard, but there is both a federal VA loan program for qualified veterans, and there's also a state-funded, Oregon state-funded ODVA program for veterans as well. So just kind of good little insight to provide for veterans. Some lenders do specialize in that state-funded ODVA home loan. Okay, last one on the buyer side. So Southern California buyers, they have plenty of funds. They plan to purchase a home for their daughter and her family. They have lots of questions for you about properties and doing virtual tours for them, but they never have their family who lives in the area join for the showings. Does this seem like a good buyer, or do you have reservations? What questions would you ask?
Would it be appropriate to ask to meet them?
Definitely. I mean,
maybe.
you're spending all of your time, gas money, yeah, yeah, to meet the family. I mean, that's a totally fair ask. There, and that family's gonna be the ones who are actually living there, right? Good. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah, no, excellent. So that should, and most of these situations I've come across and perhaps not handled in a perfect manner, but just sharing with you for things to think about as you're qualifying buyers. But in this situation, yes, that is a concern. Is maybe they don't trust you all that much as an agent. Maybe they don't even plan to use you once they put an offer in. There's all sorts of scenarios. But that should be a concern. Is like, why are they not involving their family? And maybe they're just wasting your time having you run around because they're just curious about a handful of 10, 15 properties and they just want to know more. They're just curious people, but that doesn't mean they're going to put an offer in. And if their own family who's going to live in the home hasn't seen it, the chances of them actually pursuing it and purchasing that home for their family who's never seen it is very low. Very low. So yeah, just good things to think about. And then just a few last tips on buyers. Talk to more buyers than you think you need to talk with. In terms of have a whole pool, just an assortment of buyers that you're constantly in communication with, because moving them through, if you've seen that funnel pipeline, if you're familiar with that, they're going to be in all different phases and aspects of the sales process. And so at the bottom of the funnel, at least the way I look at it, is those are your closed deals, your clients that are about to close, but it really takes a high number towards the top of the funnel of screening different people and staying in touch with a variety of different people to get towards those handful of people at the bottom of the funnel who are going to close. So continue prospecting, continue doing it in an appropriate and proper manner. And then also questions that I like to ask buyers early on in conversations. A big one where you don't need to sound salesy, but just ask it casually and confidently is as you're having a good conversation, they're talking about their criteria, you kind of just throw in there, hey, have you had the chance to talk with a lender yet about getting approved for a home? You know, just really casual. And that question right there is going to help shape really the seriousness of that buyer. And then that buyer may or may not just openly share a few details about their income or challenges that they're working through financially that can really help you know how much you need to pursue that lead and that buyer. So use that, leverage that. I use that in open houses as well. Instead of asking people, oh, do you have a real estate agent when they first walk into the open house? As you're talking to them, hey, have you connected with a lender yet? Do you have someone that you really enjoy? I have this amazing lender, you know, whether it's Cody Martin or someone else that I'd love to, you know, connect you with. And then that's less salesy, right? Because you're not selling yourself as much, but that gives you a chance to kind of feel them out and see where they're at in the sales process. Other things too that I've noticed in terms of the willingness of a buyer lead to work with you is you just need to be able to speak confidently on the current market conditions. That's probably one or two of the most important questions that they're going to ask you in terms of, and their willingness to work with you is going to revolve around is, can you respond to like what's happening in the market right now and what you're seeing in the market? So just listening to agents say in the all partner meetings and things like that and what they're experiencing, things like that can really help shape your conversations. And then making sure you're reading you know, the market action reports that are coming out on the MLS, things like that, where you can confidently respond. Any questions on that? I'll jump into sellers for the remaining time that we have. And just as an encouragement to all of you, I think it should be exciting, and I think you should look at it as an opportunity that you can, depending on, you know, I think most of you are solo and not on teams, but you have the opportunity to work with both buyers and sellers. So you have, you know, it just really increases your opportunities for closed deals. And hopefully that's just an encouragement for you. Some agents on teams only work with buyers, and they can be a bit handicapped, especially in challenging markets. You know, you need that flexibility of having options and more people to talk to and to work for both buyers and sellers. So that's a really, you know, amazing part of being an agent. But yeah, let's talk about sellers. So from what I've noted, a lot of this is just coming from experience. Sellers are typically more challenging leads to come across and to find, but are an important part of growing your business. So when it comes to prospecting for sellers, have any of you found success in a certain approach? Have any of you been hoping to implement a certain approach to finding sellers? Just opening up the floor real quick. And that's okay if not. So you've probably heard it said that sellers, oftentimes people turn into sellers who are your previous buyer clients. And I found that to be true as well. So the more professional and the better work you do and the better you negotiate for your buyers, those can turn into excellent sellers and listings down the road. And don't be too discouraged because some of your buyers might become sellers sooner than you recognize and realize. So it can happen a lot faster. It can happen overnight. And, you know, but oftentimes, you know, your buyers do turn into sellers. Door knocking is one of them, to do it in an appropriate fashion. But there's all sorts of opportunities. Have you been provided with kind of a cut sheet from Aaron regarding just different ways to prospect buyers and sellers?
We've had some meetings with Jen talking about different avenues.
Okay, excellent. And are most of you following the group Pivot Shift or Shift Pivot on Facebook?
Shift
think-
Pivot.
I think it's called Pivot Shift Ahead on Facebook. Don't quote me. I think it's Pivot Shift Ahead on Facebook. It's a Keller Williams group run by James Shaw. And there's just all sorts of masterminding, brainstorming, tons of great content on there. There's thousands of KW agents who ask questions and provide responses. But there's a lot of info there on prospecting and lead gen and things like that, just to complement and supplement your business. So if you're not following the Pivot Shift Ahead group with James Shaw on Facebook, I highly recommend it. Really good content. Okay, and it's all free. So let me talk real quick about the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. Hopefully most of you have a copy at this point and have at least read parts of it. But something that Gary Keller says in that book, and it comes up all the time in conversations in the Market Center, is listings to last, and listings can create leverage. Can anyone break down what that means and why listings can be so important?
Well, the way I see listings is it allows you to go door knocking in the area and say, hey, I have this house listed. Your neighbor trusts me. You can trust me. Here's my information. See if there's anybody you want to be in your neighborhood. It kind of allows you to look for buyers as well as sellers. And you also can do open houses, which can open up to other options as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, thank you, Alice, in the comments. It's Pivot Shift Ahead is the name of the Facebook group. And there's currently 118,000 members. There's great content in there. So don't miss out. It's free content. And a lot of big time agents from across the country share insights and things like that on lead gen. But yes, thank you, Sarah. So there's opportunities that come from listings, right? Your signs in the yard. You have the opportunity to prospect, say before open houses, talk to neighbors. And then in addition, in terms of time spent, listings can just be a little bit more efficient. They can require more upfront costs, right? In marketing, photography, videography, different expenses with advertising and marketing. So it's more expensive upfront for those listings, but the likelihood of getting an ROI on your time invested is greater with listings than it is with buyers. So just keep that in mind. Your likelihood of getting paid is certainly higher with listings than with buyers. So for the first few years of my business, I was much more buyer heavy. And the longer I'm in the business, I'm trying to get, it's hard to get sellers, of course, and it's not an easy market, but I'm trying to get more and more sellers to work with because your opportunity to get paid is far greater. You want to make sure, of course, you're pricing the home appropriately and you're doing your work on the front end. Nothing's guaranteed, but that's just what I've noticed.
I had a question on that front.
Yes.
You have these questionnaires in here that are sample ways that we can have conversations. But one of the questions is, how much do you think your home is worth? I'm having a hard time with that conversation of, I don't want to get a number. I don't want to give them a number until I do an accurate CMA. I don't want them to have a number that they're set on getting. Like, would you ever actually ask them before you do a formal CMA on that? Like, doing the actual, how to come up with a number is scary to me.
Yeah, so a few different approaches to take there. Maybe you give them a ballpark range. Ranges can really protect you. Even when you're talking with buyers about certain things and certain home types in, say, Springfield and Eugene, giving them a range can really take the pressure off of you. Even if you do create a full CMA, you might walk into their home and the home is not in the condition that it should be to sell or to price at the point that you had in mind. So ranges, in my opinion, can be one of your best friends. In terms of, if you give them a specific number over the phone and you don't have that relationship and you're not sure if they're going to use you as their agent, they might just take that information and run with it. So I would try and figure out how to leverage that question to be able to get in front of them. Like, so you could say something, if they ask you for a price point, you could say something to the extent of, I can certainly appreciate that question. And I know there's tons of online systems that might provide an estimated value. But for me to be a professional and give you an accurate assessment, I really need to be in your home and take a look to be able to appreciate all the factors and details of your home. You know, when would be a good time to meet? Next Tuesday at 3 p.m. or can you do Thursday at 4 p.m.? And just throw it out there. If they just shoot you down, chances are they're never going to be your lead or client anyways. You know, or maybe they kind of, maybe that opens the door and they say, oh, you know, those 2 dates wouldn't work, but follow up with me in a week or two. So that's my recommendation. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions on that specifically? Okay. Okay, so I am just flipping through the Ignite packet real quick. Okay, so there's a quote in here that I liked from Gary Keller, of course, in the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. It's from the Ignite packet, but it says focus becomes increasingly possible in direct proportion to how clear you are about what you want, when you want it, and what you must do to get it. So being very clear. Now, how can that apply to your prospecting, your lead gen in terms of focus and clarity? I can jump in. So lead gen prospecting is not easy, especially when you're a brand new agent and it feels like you're doing quite a few of these motions or actions for the first time. But you need to be disciplined, you need to be focused, and you need to be consistent. So basically, Gary's just emphasizing the importance of like what you want to achieve, and being focused on those goals and those tasks and holding yourself to them, because it's going to be really easy when no one's holding you accountable to your schedule to, you know, want to deviate from your plans, take extra time off, and then before you know it, you've gone 4 or 5 days with no prospecting and no lead generation, right? Or no screening of, or no check-in with past clients or past leads or anything to that extent. So just be disciplined and be focused. And the Pivot group on Facebook is excellent for that as well. There's people on there that are looking for accountability and things. If you're in need of that. Okay. All right. So jumping back into sellers, let's get refocused. So a few quick questions similar to what we did for the buyers. What does a perfect seller look like? Or just tell me what a terrible seller looks like.
For perfect seller looks like for me, it would be if he's very clear with his vision, he has a timeline, and he knows what he's exactly looking out of the sale, and ready to sign an agreement form with me.
Good. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay. And good. We talked about my other questions there. So I will say, in terms of what a good seller looks like, if your seller doesn't have a realistic plan on where they're going and why they're doing it, why they're selling and moving, they're probably not a good seller. So this is really important. This is where your judgment comes in on where are you going to spend your time, where are you going to spend your resources, where are you going to spend your money, right? Listings take time. Does your seller have a legitimate reason for moving? You really need to get to the roots, to the bottom of that as you're talking with leads. Because sellers can waste your time just like buyers. And a few things that might materialize or look like, if a seller wants to price a home, you may have heard some of this content before, but if a seller wants to price a home well above what your pricing recommendations are, one, they're not listening to you as an agent, and two, do we think we're going to be able to sell the home at that price point? Or are you going to put all your money and time into it and the home's going to sit on the market? So kind of a rhetorical question, but just think about that, right? Or if the seller, someone mentioned earlier, if the seller can't get pre-qualified or pre-approved for another home, but no matter what, they want to sell this home and just figure it out as they go, is that a good seller? You know, maybe they're going to go buy an RV and visit national parks across the US. That's okay, but they need to have a plan they're comfortable and confident with and not like totally flying by the seat of their pants, because you don't want to be like the day before closing for your seller and they pull the plug and say, oh shoot, I don't want to sell after all. I want to stay here. And then that leaves you in a terrible position. So just be thinking about that. You know, how are we screening our sellers? Oftentimes like building trust with sellers takes just more time and effort than with buyers. I've just noticed sellers are more selective in how they screen agents typically, and they're already property owners. So they oftentimes have already worked with an agent and they know what they're looking for in terms of professionalism with the agent they want to hire. Okay, so I have scenarios. Since I love scenarios, I'm going to run a handful of them past you. And I want you to tell me if this is a good lead opportunity for these sellers, and hit me with a yes, no, or maybe, and any sort of insight or additional questions that you might ask. Okay, so these sellers need to move as soon as possible to a different state because they're being evicted from the park they live in, and they want to live closer to their family in Arizona. Is this a good seller opportunity? Sorry, Allison, I can't hear you.
Yeah, it wasn't working. I don't know why, but I think I was confused too on, so they're being evicted. So how are they a seller? Is it like a short sale?
So yes, thank you. They're in a manufactured home in a park.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're being evicted from the park they live in. It's a mobile home park. They have a, 3-bed, 2-bath, kind of nice manufactured home in the park, and they're being evicted. And the park management has given them a requirement to sell their home within the next 2 months. And
So they
plan
have
to move
back
to a different state.
payments or something that is an issue that's causing them to be evicted.
There's a significant issue and a specific reason why they're being evicted. What questions would you ask, and would you work with this seller?
I would be apprehensive. I would feel bad for them.
Okay. Anyone else? So we'll say that there were complaints from the neighbors. Thank you, Georgia, for the question in the chat. We'll say there were specific complaints, repeated complaints from the neighbors, because as you know, they live in pretty close proximity to each other in the park. And so that's why management is evicting them. So I think we have a lot of indecisive people at the moment if they take this buyer, or excuse me, this seller lead. Yay or nay? No. Okay. Well, use your judgment. Certainly follow on questions. Certainly, you could dig quite a bit further into this question, of course, on what the issues were and if you think that you could sell at a realistic price, things like that. But just realize this should get you thinking. Allison says no, that she wouldn't. Thank you, Allison. So this should get you thinking on the park management has had a very bad experience with this person. So do you think you could do better? It's kind of the question. Are you going to have a good experience or bad experience with this person if park management had such difficulties? So just be careful, protect yourself out there. Next seller scenario. This seller took a job in Portland and they have to move there within the next 3 months. Their home has been well maintained and they're looking for a smooth transaction and low stress. Would you work with the seller? Yeah. Yeah. It's an excellent seller from what we can tell at this point. Good. Lots of yeses in the chat. So this seller is an investor. They need to quickly sell their duplex because he needs the money and doesn't want the stress of owning a rental property. Would you work with this person? Yeah. Yeah. Investors, thank you, everyone. Yes, yes is in the chat. Excellent. So investors can be great people to work for. On the buyer side, they'll oftentimes lowball the heck out of properties. So you might write a lot of offers that get rejected. And you got to protect your time and yourself in that aspect. But, you know, sellers, like a seller investor, could be a great, very casual transaction. They usually don't live there. You just want to be mindful and make sure you're really careful with tenant rules, right? I won't go into that now, but make sure you're very careful with tenant rules and tenant protections and things for state ruling, for the state laws. But those can be great clients.
I'll
Yes,
tell you,
Sarah.
I'm one of those terrible investors that likes to lowball, and I like
Yep.
to, I put it out there, and because you never know when you're going to get the yes. And I had an agent who we'd worked with locally before, and he wouldn't do it. And Stacy, Stacy Coy said, "I'll do it. I don't care." And then she's the one who I went to when it was time to sell my house instead of him. So, you know, it built, and now I'm here under her. So
Nice, excellent. So
you got to
it paid
build
off.
it. Sometimes it's worth just throwing it out there to let them have, you know, to build the relationship.
Sure, sure, absolutely. And if you know it's not a multi-offer situation, that might be a good strategy, might be a good approach, you know. But if you're, you know, hypothetically, if you're competing against 4 other offers and you wanna go $30,000 under the list price, and your investor's not listening to you and they do that repeatedly, you know, you might want to reconsider your relationship, depending on your best, you know, use your judgment in that situation. Okay, so moving on to the next situation. This seller is leaving the state in 10 months and isn't sure where they're headed at this point. What are your thoughts and what would you ask the seller? They're leaving in 10 months, but they're not sure where they're headed at this point. What would your approach be? Right? So they're not an immediate seller. But what approach would you take? You essentially just want to make sure you're staying in front of this person, providing them value. And oftentimes you'll find that people's timelines will move up, especially when sellers get their mindset of moving somewhere else or being closer to family or whatever it is. That oftentimes those timelines might move up drastically. So stay in touch, keep in touch, and provide them with value in the process. So Allison says nurture the lead. And Haley Sells, excellent question, says, yeah, Haley says, what's their reason for leaving? So nothing specific in this scenario, but that's a great question to ask. Are they going to be a motivated seller? You know, do they have a specific reason? So excellent. Okay. This seller currently runs a daycare in her home. She hasn't moved in 40 years and has unresolved issues with the neighbor. Would you work with the seller?
There's a good chance the seller will help you sell the house. They want the neighbor gone.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point,
Depends
Sarah.
on if it's like a boundary issue that needs to be resolved on title, or they just don't like each other.
Yes. Yeah, it's all circumstantial. Allison says no, she wouldn't work with them. Georgia says maybe, and Haley says depending on the issue. So yeah, I'd work through this scenario more and just figure out what exactly is the issue. Um, but yeah, just they probably if anyone has unresolved issues with their neighbor, they probably have a strong personality and they probably, you know, unless it's really the neighbor's fault, you know, they might be a challenging client to work for, right? As soon as you hear that. So if they're not a great neighbor, they might not be a great client. But, you know, as long as you can build that relationship and tell them what needs to happen in order for the home to sell and to do so in a manner where you're disclosing any disputes, for example, a boundary dispute that Sarah mentioned, that needs to be disclosed. Make sure you're doing all those things properly. That could still turn into a good client. And then, of course, you just want to be really careful on timelines. If you hear, a daycare is being run out of the home, timelines, of course, are going to be key there for when the daycare is going to stop providing services. And then also, property condition, the home's going to probably be a little bit more beat up. So you want to think about ways that maybe you can improve the home before getting it to the market. So this seller, a few more scenarios, and then we'll kind of just open things up for questions and a final discussion. So a few last scenarios. So this seller has another home they absolutely love. They found it online, and they want this home that's closer to family, but they have to sell their current home to buy it. Their current home has quite a bit of deferred maintenance. Would you work with the seller? Haley says, depending on the issue, yes. Georgia says yes. Okay. Yeah, and you want to be careful too if, like one caveat, there's always 100 ways to look at any challenge or any client or any lead, but something that immediately comes to mind here is this other property they've identified and they love. Is it a one-of-one property? And by that, do I mean it's an irreplaceable? They wouldn't move if someone else purchased that property before they could purchase it, because then would that take their home off the market? So just making sure you're working through those things where their motivation to move is greater than just one property that they have to have. Does that make sense? And then also understanding, are most of you familiar with the bumpable buyer process? So that's a really important process if you're working for sellers, and just those contingencies are really important to keep in mind, and really make sure you're reading through the contracts on those those contingent right to purchase agreements. There's some really good details and really good things to keep in mind as you're talking to your clients. But if you can work through all those obstacles that come with both buying a home and selling a home that's contingent upon that sale, that's two transaction sides, and you're certainly earning some good money in that situation. But just make sure you're reading through those contingent right to purchase agreements. Okay. Enough on that topic. So this seller wants to move for lower property tax reasons, but they absolutely love their current home. Is this a good seller? Kind of like a lot of the other situation, it depends. You might be able to find a solution where that works to be able to keep this seller in their home. But this can be a really tough buyer if this seller also needs you to help purchase something else. This can be a really, really tough buyer to work with if they have like an immaculate, amazing home in perfect neighborhood, in the so-called perfect neighborhood, and they want to essentially be in an area with lower property taxes. That means there's probably going to be quite a few compromises in criteria, and that's a hard shift for any seller. So this person might not have enough motivation to move. So I would say a maybe, if potentially no, from my experience on this. Okay. Last few. This seller has a poor relationship with the park owners, but wants to move soon and really needs to just get out of the park. So you ask them where they plan to live or where they plan to move to, and they say, I just need to get out of this park. That's their only response they'll give you. Are you going to work with this seller? Yeah, probably not. And then you connect with a builder who just finished constructing a nice home in Eugene, who wants you to take a look at it and provide a CMA. Does this sound like a promising seller? Yeah, just understanding timelines and when their certificate of occupancy is issued, things like that are really important for new construction. The seller calls you for a listing presentation and said they're interviewing 4 other realtors. Is this someone that you would pursue? So that's a tough one, right? I think Bo is responding to the most recent question. Bo says no. Georgia says maybe. Bo says no, yes, and Georgia says maybe. So yeah, it's a tough one, right? Isha says no. So there are situations, depending on the agent you talk to, most agents would say at least you get a swing at the plate and you get the opportunity to try and connect with the seller. You might be one of 5, one of 6 real estate agents, but there are all sorts of hidden benefits to even getting rejected in your listing presentation. You just got a ton of practice. You just got to talk with probably somebody who's a very experienced seller, and you could get into their mind a little bit and understand their thought process. So if you lose out on that listing, you could take all of that knowledge and experience and apply it to the next listing presentation that you do. Sellers will oftentimes share quite a few things that other listing agents have done or said to them that they really liked. And you can take that, right? That's tangible information that you can use in the future. So even if it does become a rejection, it's just another stepping stone. So consider taking that opportunity, even though it seems like a waste of time. You never know. And you never know how you might connect, or maybe you have some commonalities or things that you really click and connect with the seller on. So just things to think about. Okay, and the last question I have for the scenarios is this seller wants you to list their home for $75,000 above your comps. Do you take the listing? Or if you take the listing, what caveat do you have with the seller? Oh, sorry, Sarah, I can't hear you.
I was just basically saying what everybody else is thinking, which is if you put something on the market that high, you're losing the opportunity of having the biggest gain at the beginning. Could have a caveat that says, well, we can try it at that, but then they have to agree to lower it to a certain price within 3 weeks or whatever your stipulations are. But then everybody in our classes has said that that's a terrible idea. So I don't know that I would take it, because I'm not sure it's worth the initial investment of doing all the marketing when it's not realistic to sell at that price.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be a bit subjective in this situation. Isha says no, Georgia says yes, but talk about the days on market and maybe when we do the price reduction. So something that, without trying to make this a trick question, but what if this is a $1.7 million home and they want to price it $75,000 over asking? The relative percentage in terms of how far they are above comps, becomes far smaller. So something in that situation versus it being, a $350,000 home, and they want to sell it for $425,000, that relative increase is obviously far greater. So just things to think about. But yes, if they're open to doing it, if they just want to test the market, $75,000 above your recommendations, and then maybe drop it pretty soon after, that could turn into a good opportunity. I'm not saying that's the best approach to take, but if they're a really hard-headed seller and they won't do it any other way, sometimes you just got to figure out how to work with the seller and how to turn it into a deal, so try to figure out how to turn challenging situations into opportunities, because you never know when it might turn around or turn towards your favor. But yes, like you're saying, you guys have all been trained well. In the previous market, if you price things, say 3 to 5% above where the market value was at for that property, the market was appreciating so quickly that if you're overpriced in the matter of a few months, you might be within more of a target range and an accurate pricing of that home, versus we're in a little bit more of a market where appreciation is minimal on an annual basis. So we want to make sure to more accurately price our listings when possible. And then another consideration too here is if they want to go 75,000 over, is, well, for starters, the seller's probably going to take more work, but what neighborhood, what location is this home listed? Is it out in the country, or is it more central in the town, right? And then is your seller willing to take feedback where, you're confident you'll still at least get a handful of showings, and you can provide feedback in terms of pricing from other agents to your seller, and kind of shape the discussion as you move along in the sales process. So things to consider. But don't always, I guess with sellers, this is just my personal 2 cents. You try and work with them a little bit more, right? Because they already have their own property, and you try and figure out how to make things work in most circumstances for sellers. They just need to be realistic in terms of pricing and what their property condition is. So kind of finding that balance is important. Okay, so we had the chance to talk about buyers. We had the chance to talk about sellers. I just wanted to open things up for the last 10 minutes or so on key concerns you're having, key challenges you're having, and any recommendations that I can provide you, in these last 10 minutes. Or I would say, do most of you feel like you at least have 1 or 2 decent prospects in the pipeline at this point? I know it's a tough market out there. Oh, Allison, you're muted. Are you just nodding? Okay. So yes, lead gen and prospecting is just such a key part of your business. Making sure you're getting out there talking to people. Maybe you're buying cheap internet leads. Whatever it is, just make sure that you're increasing your volume of contacts and being just consistent and as methodical as possible with following up with those leads. It's always frustrating when you talk with a lead, you have a few great conversations early on, and then you check back in, you forget to call them, you check back in about 5 months later, and you're still on a great relationship, great terms. They remember who you were, but they sold or closed with another agent because you didn't do a great job of lead follow-up, So just try and be consistent, try and have systems in place, whether you're using the command CRM or other methods of follow-up, but just make sure you're being consistent with those leads. And yeah, and there are opportunities out there, and I would just, yeah. So I'm just curious, feedback wise, how are you guys feeling like lead gen wise? Like, do you need more support? Do you feel like you're on an island? Allison? Like, I can't hear you for some reason. Do you mind just typing in the chat what's on your mind? Lead gen is tough. Yes. Lead gen is tough. Yes. And I'm not you probably saw my bio for Ignite. I'm not a super salesy person. And to be honest, I don't really have any family, and I didn't have any friends when I first moved out here to this area. So that puts you right a few steps behind the competition, right? Because so you've got to work a little bit harder. What I've found to be helpful, really helpful, is to be involved in quite a few different groups, whether it's soccer teams, swim clubs, hiking groups, whatever. I'm a pretty active person, so I like to be involved in a lot of different groups. I'm starting to form a BNI chapter. It's a networking group of professionals where there's one person from each profession in the group. All sorts of things like that. You need to be building like spheres, networks, kind of like support bubbles where you're supporting them and helping them build business, and they're doing the same for you. And then also just getting out in the community and volunteering in different aspects, not just for the sake of business, to give back, but to also, give the chance to get in front of people and show them that you do care about the community, that you're a part of the community, and you're not just looking to take and sell, but you're looking to invest back in the community. So just being involved, being out there in the community. I've been there, I've done it for, I was pretty much all online prospecting or buying online leads when I first became an agent. and I was behind my computer, behind my desk way too much, right? You need to be out there grabbing a cup of coffee with different professionals in different industries, seeing how you can support them, going to different just networking groups and clubs and things like that, where people see you and recognize you and you become the face and in their mind, the real estate expert. But the more that you invest in other people's professions and jobs, especially those who own small businesses, the more they're going to look to you and be like, hey, you know, Allison or Sarah or Haley has been helping me out in immense areas of my business or supporting me in incredible ways. The least I can do is throw them a friend who's looking to buy, you know, an opportunity. So yeah, just it takes a little bit of time to kind of building that momentum is key. Because internet leads can be really tough, right? And you need to call so many, follow up with so many leads. You know, if you can create more people who are in the community who value you, who you've been supporting, who in turn come to support you, you know, kind of creates like the perfect fusion of business growth. So, Bo, it's an excellent question. I think I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Did you tell people you're new when you started? I am typically pretty honest with people. So yes, I would be pretty open and honest. But what I can say on being new is people will feel out and sense your motivation and your like dedication to the profession early on. If you're very lackadaisical in your lead gen follow-up, or sending them properties and maybe touching them with newsletters from time to time, whatever that is, if you're very lackadaisical about everything you do in the profession, like they'll sense that. But people want to see oftentimes like good leads and certain lead opportunities will want you to be successful and want you to succeed. You just need to find those people, you know, so they're not going to care. They want to make sure that you at least know what you're doing or you can figure it out, you know, as you go along. And you're going to need to work twice as hard for your first few closings. It's just the nature of the business. And trust me, I've been there, you know, but once you get that momentum, it's just like anything in life, like you kind of build that momentum and you maintain that momentum and people see you doing business and see you transacting. And then you can talk to friends. Friends are going to start coming up to you and ask you, they're going to ask you very specific real estate property questions. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be their go-to agent immediately. But if you can field those questions and answer them in an articulate manner that shows you have like industry insight, I mean, things just really take off from there. So be consistent. You're going to have to work 2 or 3 times as hard for those first few closings. I've totally been there. But don't give up and don't just lean back on 1 or 2 leads and say, oh, they're definitely closing. Let me take care of these 2 leads before I do any more networking or prospecting, because those 2 leads are not guaranteed, right? And if those crash and burn, you don't want to be left, you know, with nothing else going for your business.
So may I ask, because you mentioned that you in the beginning you spend money buying leads on the internet, and you said you spend too much time behind the computer, and did you try cold calling, or how long did you do it for?
So I would say my first year and a half or so was, and so talking about tough market conditions, COVID hit like right as I got my license. I did my first few Ignite classes, and then boom, like COVID hit, our market center office shut down. There was very little like support or resources, and nobody knew if agents were even going to be considered essential personnel. So like my timing couldn't have been worse. But with all that said, I just tried to be really consistent. So yes, I would purchase online leads and I would build Excel spreadsheets. Typically I'd purchase anywhere from 30 to like maybe 50 leads a month. And if you're consistent over time, that becomes a massive list of people. I'm not saying all of them are good buyer leads or opportunities, but you're talking about hundreds of people, right? And you're following up, and then I just mark them in my Excel spreadsheet. CRMs work better than my Excel spreadsheets, but I'd mark them like green, or excuse me, I'd mark them like a light green, dark green, depending on how hot or cold they were, and then like yellow and then red. So yellow is like a maybe they would pull through someday, and then a red was like they're never going to transact, especially not with me, if they're going with another real estate agent. So I'd build these like Excel spreadsheets, and then you just follow up and be consistent over time. And a follow-up could just be an easy text or check-in, and you're putting these green, especially these green leads on your MLS web searches. They're getting properties from you. And over time, some of these people will convert. But what I did wrong, or what I could have improved on, was that meant I was basically in my cubicle in my office all the time, calling, texting, doing follow-up with all these purchase leads. And I wasn't out in the community, right? I wasn't volunteering. I wasn't connecting with people as much. So I felt like my growth, I got those first few transactions and made that happen, but my growth wasn't very strong or impressive until I really, you want to add like multiple pillars of lead gen, right? So you want to have your, your open house pillar is key. Your, maybe you're buying internet leads, that's key. Maybe your sphere is key. Eventually you'll get to the point where your past clients is going to be one of your key lead pillars. But the more like having like 4 to 7 key lead pillars that you're really focused on and consistent on is just critical to growing business over time. So it doesn't come all at once, but with consistency, you'll see things grow. In the workbook, that's a great question, Bo. I'll try not to go too much longer since we just hit 3 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Or if everyone's, I understand if you have to go, but in the workbook as well, you'll see, I've got a slide here. It talks about how buyers are finding their agent and how sellers are finding their agent. So statistically, most people are finding their agent on the buyer side from a friend, neighbor, or relative. That's 47% of buyers, friend, neighbor, relative. So your neighbors, even if you live in an apartment complex, your neighbors could turn into amazing buyers at some point. But they need to see you working. They need to see you in the industry, and you need to be potentially adding value to their life in some way, right? But they could, they might use you as their agent. So that could be, if you live in a neighborhood where you want to transact and do business, or you want them to be your sellers, you can provide value in all sorts of ways by dropping little things off to your neighbors and loving on them essentially. But yeah, just keep in mind where leads are coming from. But yes, did that answer your question, Bo?
Yes, because I actually just started try cold calling, and I feel the same way. Like there's no real relationship, and I don't want to be too salesy and pushy, so it made me feel uncomfortable. So that really helped. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I do cold calling, Bo, I try and have a very specific reason and have like just really good content that I'm providing them when I call. For example, I did a little bit of cold calling last week. I was hosting an open house on Saturday. So on Friday, I called around that neighborhood and invited some neighbors to come out. I almost, I don't think they're going to use me because they're probably going to use a previous agent, but I found a buyer in a matter of like 15, or excuse me, I found a seller, someone who's probably going to sell within the next year, within 15 minutes of cold calling, inviting people to the open house on Saturday. He's probably going to use a previous agent, but you find motivated people really fast. It's just a matter of getting them to work with you and trust you, over time. But yes, so have something you're inviting them to, or maybe you give them a $5 Dutch Bro card for any neighbor that shows up. If you did cold call them, they're on the approved, of course, avoid the DNC list. But if they're an approved call, maybe any neighbor that shows up, they get a $5 Dutch Bro gift card or something for showing up and for providing feedback. And that's a really easy phone call, right? You're giving them something right there, like on the spot. So yeah, it just depends on what you're calling about. Because I agree, Bo, it's not easy for me just to randomly circle prospect a neighborhood to try and find sellers.
Got it. But one quick question. Do you have a problem sometimes when you just randomly call people, especially the neighborhood, and then they're like, oh, how did you get my phone number? Or do people get upset sometimes?
Yeah, from time to time. It all depends on how you start the phone call too. Like I typically talk too fast. So if you can slow things down, and I go with something like, hey, Jasmine, this is Kurt Delahook from Keller Williams Realty, Eugene Springfield. I know this call is totally out of the blue, So you're kind of already like very casual. I know this call's totally out of the blue. I'm just calling to invite you to an open house tomorrow. It's just around the corner from where you live, you know, at 3306 River Heights. Would you want to swing by between 11 and 1 and take a look? You know, I'll have a granola bar, I'll have a Dutch Bro gift card or something if you show up and give feedback, you know, something really casual. You know, and maybe like last Friday, I had somebody say, no, I'm not looking to, he thought I was calling to like see if you wanted to make a move, you know, if you want to buy it specifically, but I kind of do that just to see if they have friends or family moving to the area. So yeah, just a casual phone call. It's all about how you approach it. And then if someone does say, hey, how'd you get my phone number? I just say something to the extent of, or like, you're not supposed to be calling me. I just say something to the extent of, you know, Frank, I'm really careful not to call anybody on the federal do not call registry. Your number is, you know, I can find your number publicly, if you want to say that. I can find your number publicly. And so it's attached to this house. So I'm just calling to follow up. I won't call again. I appreciate your time. You know, something like that. Most people are human. You might have one or two bad apples. But I think if you're just casual and then you're making sure not to call, you know, and you can inform them too that, hey, I don't call people on the do not call registry, you know? So, and you can even point them in the direction if they want to register their phone number, like, you know, so that they're not getting angry at you to any extent.
Okay, I'll use that next time.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Of course, but there's opportunities out there. Just be consistent. If you need an accountability partner, do it. And I like to try and do a workout early in the morning to like get focused, get on the right track, right mindset, and maybe do a cold plunge or something early in the morning in the river. And you've already done the most difficult thing first thing in the morning. And then after that, your phone calls. Once you make your first couple phone calls, you just kind of get in the rhythm and the flow, and it just kind of goes a little more smoothly. And you find what works, and you just make little tweaks along the road, along the way. So, so yeah, that's my 2 cents. Any other questions on prospecting and things like that? You guys got this. Don't be too discouraged. Real estate comes in big like ebbs and flows as well. So you'll notice like you'll have a handful of transactions and then things will slow down and then you have to ramp business back up. So it's a lot of ebbs and flows as you move along. But we can wrap things up there. Thank you, everyone. I know we were 6 minutes long, but feel free to reach out, email, call, text if I can help in the future. You guys are awesome. And thank you for your participation. So, see ya.